Hi, Dr. Eric Westman here with another episode of Dr. Westman Reacts. This is a video called Debunks Keto Diet. Let's see how it goes.
Hi, Dr. Joel Kahn at the Kahn Center for Cardiac Longevity, a cardiologist in suburban Detroit. And I'm pleased to talk to you for a couple of minutes about the topic, can a meat-heavy ketogenic diet be healthy long-term? Very concerning, but let's talk about terms.
Very concerning? Well, wait a second. Okay, already we have a little bias against, or maybe the conclusion is real, but I've been doing a low-carb keto diet myself for a long time, published research papers over the last 20 years, randomized trials, prospective studies. Let's see what Dr. Kahn says.
Because a few years ago, you didn't open every website and every magazine and read about ketogenic diet, particularly with Hollywood stars and such. So you can go back decades and find some important medical data that if you're dealing with a child that has refractory epilepsy, before there was medication or even after when there wasn't a good response, that putting a child on a water fast sometimes improved their seizures, but it wasn't very well tolerated, obviously, by growing children. And then people tried a low-carb, high-fat diet to induce the creation of chemicals in the body called ketone bodies that can be an alternative fuel to the brain in addition to glucose. And there was a response in 30 to 40% of children, but these medical reports indicated many, many potential side effects, including some scary reports of death during ketogenic diets, cardiac issues during ketogenic diets, and such. But some...
Hold on. Dr. Kahn's talking about the ketogenic diet for epilepsy in children. So often these children are very sick, and it's kind of a last extreme measure for some of these children to be put on a ketogenic diet. In fact, it was life-saving for many of them. And that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about a keto diet. I'm talking about a low-carbohydrate ketogenic diet with real food. And we've published studies for the treatment of obesity and type 2 diabetes, and we've not seen the problems that he's talking about with heart attacks. And so I'm realizing he's confusing the ketogenic diet for epilepsy, which is very strict. Some children will have a seizure if they have half a mini candy bar. We're talking about a well-studied approach in adults using real food and protein and fats with very low carbs. But let's see if he brings in the other type of low-carb diets that have been studied.
Somehow in the last 5 to 10 years, this medical therapy with an unnatural diet that has no really long-term use in any healthy community in the world has become the darling of Silicon Valley, become the darling of Hollywood, become the darling of athletes.
Hang on. There is research published. I'm author of a lot of that research. And the fact that Hollywood and Silicon Valley are doing it does not detract from the fact that it works. In fact, I looked to new technology I use a smartphone. I don't use a phone with a cord anymore. Anyway, these are interesting techniques to tell you that it's only Hollywood stars. Well, Hollywood stars aren't going to do things that are going to kill them if they're worth as much money as they are. They're going to use things that are well tested, I would think.
Become the darling of athletes, LeBron James, Halle Berry, the Kardashians, Hugh Jackman, all come to mind. Well, we have...
And what's wrong with that?
I have an independent way to assess this that's outside of my own opinions, which is the U.S. News and World Report puts together a list every year of the top diets for health and other conditions that you're trying to strive for, reversal of heart disease and diabetes and such. And the ketogenic friendly diets like Whole30, Paleo, and the ketogenic diet itself are always at the very bottom of the list of recommended diets.
I'm very familiar. This is called the appeal to authority, where you rustle together people, none of whom are familiar with low-carb and keto diets, and they judge the different diets. And I know I've tried to get low-carb and keto-friendly people onto these sorts of panels, and they're not allowed to be on there. So it would be like in the Olympics, only having the judges from one country and then saying, you know, who won the event. It's, well, lo and behold, it's the country that all the judges are from. You know, so this is called a biased group of a panel of experts, even though I'm thinking he's not going to say that.
With one exception. The U.S. News & World Report considers the ketogenic diet to be a rapid weight loss diet. There are many other rapid weight loss diets, some unhealthy, like influenza and chemotherapy, but there are some healthy versions.
Now hang on. What's wrong with a rapid weight loss diet? In fact, in my field of obesity medicine, most doctors use medication to help people, or programs that they sell you to purchase, and there's even weight loss surgery. So to say that it's just a weight loss diet doesn't detract from the fact that it might be helpful. I don't see that logic.
Versions like a whole food, plant-based, no salt, oil, sugar diet. You can use various kinds of fasting mimicking diets. There's many ways to induce a more rapid weight loss, but ketogenic is one. But what about long term? We're going to bring the carbohydrates down, so there go whole grains, there go legumes, goodbye dairy, which is fine by me, of course. We're going to...
Dairy, it can be included on a keto diet. I'm not sure what he's talking about. Cream, cheese, things like that. They're low in carbs, bringing in the word whole food, plant-based, I'm getting the idea that he's really in that kind of tribe, thinking that that is the best way to eat, I'm thinking.
Get rid of most fruits, maybe leave some leafy greens in, and we're going to bring the fat content very high. That might be with meats and cheeses, might be with butters and such, and that's going to induce ketosis or ketogenic diet. Well, the data is concerning that long-term, this may be a very unhealthy program. And this is a topic that's not being addressed by proponents in the medical community, dietitian community, and certainly the lay community about the ketogenic diet. There are, as I count now, nearly 10 published studies. These are scientific studies. These are not just on a blog on the internet, that are in what we call peer-reviewed journals. In total, these studies involve more than 1 million subjects who answered information on their diet, and if their diet fit into a low-carb, high-fat program, LCHF, they were followed. And there was an important finding in the studies, and these are what are called association studies, but a low-carb, high-fat diet was associated with an increased risk of early mortality. Let's say that again, early mortality, early death.
So these association studies are what we call hypothesis generating. They don't make conclusions. You can't draw a conclusion from, unless the association is huge. I mean, the association of smoking with lung cancer is 12-fold, and in these studies, usually there's an association of 1.5 as opposed to 12. So it's not that an association can't be used usefully clinically, it's just that small associations really are not important enough to draw conclusions and make policy changes from that. So I'm afraid that that's the kind of research that he's talking about. No, it's not a blog, but there's a lot of peer-reviewed publication that still is not worthy of drawing conclusions from.
In following people that describe their diet, and these were healthy people at the beginning, increased risk of death. There's one study from the Harvard School of Public Health that particularly concerns me as a cardiologist. Over 4,000 people have had a heart attack. They answer food questionnaires. Their diet is described as a low-carb, high-fat diet. And they follow these people, and there's an increased risk of dying post-heart attack compared to people that describe their diet as high-carb, whole food, plant-based diets.
Yeah, it's still not strong enough evidence.
It's the right diet to eat for a heart patient. And then we get into some data finally from Dr. Walter Longo. If you don't know Dr. Walter, L-O-N-G-O, at the University of Southern California, one of the world's leading scientists, biochemists, nutritionists, an incredible guy who's been pumping out data. And he calls any diet that jacks up animal protein and animal fat, it will trigger aging pathways. Many of these pathways he was involved in elucidating, a pathway called the IGF-1 pathway, the mTOR pathway. So it's not just guesswork. There actually is basic biochemistry, epidemiology, not many randomized clinical studies. There's also data from
no randomized clinical trials. So the biochemistry is fascinating, and the totality of the change of metabolism when you eat a keto or low-carb diet, it goes way beyond what Dr. Longo has studied. I'm very familiar with his research. So that the change in metabolism when you're inducing ketosis is actually very similar to the fasting that he's talking about in his research. It's just he came from the kind of the plant-based upbringing, if you will, or pedigree, and hasn't considered that meat might be healthy. But I think he's got solid research, and the biochemistry is just being unraveled in terms of how the whole body reacts when you take carbohydrates out of the equation. And actually, it's looking pretty good, I have to say.
There's also data from what we call centenarian studies. Show me in the blue zones, if you know what that is, and if you don't, please read about it, where people are following long-term ketogenic diets other than in periods of famine and starvation. So
well,
overall.
So the blue zones, there's a book that went to areas of the world where people live over 100 years frequently. Not everyone does, and they described what they ate and their lifestyle, and it's never just the diet that is a factor in these places, it's the entire lifestyle. And the problem is, it's like looking through a lens. You can see what you want to see often, and in describing these kinds of cultures, none of them, to my knowledge, are very high in sugar as well. They might be having carbohydrates, but not sugar. And then the fact that looking back to the past means we can't do better in the future has always been a logical fallacy to me. I think if we only looked back, we would say man and women, we weren't made to fly, and we would never have had the Orville and Wilbur Wright test out flying, you know. So I think actually we might even find a diet that's better than anyone knows today, or even looking in the past. So I've never been persuaded by that blue zone centenarian argument. We looked at, Dr. Rosedale and I looked at people who were following low-carb diets, and their insulin levels were very low. And in centenarians, the insulin level is very low. So metabolically, that tells me for longevity, you want to eat and have a lifestyle in such a way that insulin levels are low. But even then, there are no randomized trials of people at different insulin levels, which would be ideal to draw a conclusion from.
Do you want to do a meat-heavy ketogenic diet? Everybody respond with me, no. It's associated with an increased risk of early mortality. We presume it's associated with an increased risk of heart disease. There isn't enough data to declare that.
Nice that he declared that at the end, although the whole, it was almost like cheerleading there, and say N-O. But he was, honestly, he said there are no randomized trials that say keto causes heart disease, and yet kind of the whole timbre or implication of the video is that it's unhealthy for you. And that's because we've come through an era where a low-fat diet was thought to fix everything. Pretty much if you're a cardiologist, that's what you were taught, and there actually could be other ways to go about it. Reducing metabolic syndrome is the way a low-carb diet addresses cardiometabolic risk. Well, let's see how he concludes.
Except in these post-heart attack groups, and it's bad for the environment, and it's certainly bad for the animals. Stick with whole food, plant diets, my favorite for 42 years in my life. Bye-bye.
Well, so then bringing in the argument about good for the planet, good for the animals, really begs the question of, is it good for a human? No one is in favor of inhumane treatment of the planet or animals, and there are actually ways to have humane treatment of animals in sustainable agriculture. So I'm not an expert in that, but I can point you to people who are experts in that area. So I guess on balance, this was a biased video against keto diets, confusing ketogenic diet for epilepsy, and kind of not paying attention to any of the research that we've generated at Duke, other people have generated. Versa Health in Silicon Valley generated probably the best papers on diabetes reversal, and it may have come out after this video was made. No, I don't think it was, but anyway, not so impressed with this one. I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and that's Dr. Westman Reacts. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.